Now it's time to actually style our application. And this time I didn't include any pre-written styles, because I want to teach you all about Tailwind CSS in this Tailwind crash course. Now, many people have heard about Tailwind before and really don't like it. It is, however, getting super popular, especially combined with React. And therefore, many people do want to learn Tailwind, which is why I decided to add this section to the course. Now, if you're not interested in this, you can safely skip this section and pick up the project right in the next one. But for the rest of us, let's now go set up Tailwind from scratch and then use it to style all the components that we need in this app. So as always, let's start this section by understanding the technology that we're going to be using. So in this case, that's Tailwind CSS. So what is Tailwind CSS, or Tailwind for short? Well, I think there is no better way of defining Tailwind than the description that they have on their own website, which says that Tailwind is a utility-first CSS framework packed with utility classes like Flex, Text Center, and Rotate 90, among many other classes that can be composed to build any design directly in your markup. So right in your HTML or JSX. Now, okay, so that sounds nice, but what actually is this utility-first CSS approach? Well, basically, when we write utility-first CSS, we write lots and lots of tiny classes where each class has one single purpose. And we then combine these classes to build entire components and layouts. So that's the idea behind utility-first CSS or atomic CSS, which is the same thing. Now, Tailwind did not invent this approach, but they were the ones who made it really popular by building this super high-quality framework that's also super easy to use. So basically, in Tailwind, all these tiny classes that we just talked about are already written for us, ready to be used. So when we use Tailwind for our styling, we're not going to write any new CSS at all. Instead, we will leverage some of Tailwind's hundreds of classes to design and build anything that we can imagine. So it's really that powerful. But instead of me listing all the great features here of Tailwind, let's do this as a list of pros and cons, because of course there are also some problems with an approach like this. But first, let's actually start with the good parts. So one of the main advantages of using Tailwind is that you don't have to worry about naming classes ever again, which means that you can focus on writing your styles instead of coming up with class names. Another huge benefit of Tailwind is the fact that you don't have to jump between files all the time, so as you write markup and styles. You do it all at the same time and all in one place, which is incredibly convenient once you get used to this workflow. And a great side effect of this is that you will immediately understand the styling in any project that uses Tailwind, which will not only make it easy to collaborate with other people, but also to come back to your own projects after many months or even years. So, in my opinion, these first two advantages alone are enough reason to give Tailwind a try. Not thinking about classes and not having to jump between files all the time is really a game changer. But there are even more advantages. For example, Tailwind can really be seen as a design system with very good predefined colors, font sizes, spacing, and more. So the framework itself has already taken many good design decisions for you, which empowers developers to build beautiful and consistent UIs a lot easier than before. So all of this will of course save you a lot of time, not only because you will write a lot less CSS, but also because things like responsive design are extremely easy and fast to implement as well. And I could really go on and on here, but just one more thing that I will say is that Tailwind's documentation is world class. And the same is true for the integration into VS Code, which gives you auto-completion for all Tailwind classes. Okay, but enough praising, let's go to the bad parts that everyone likes to point out immediately. And the biggest thing that people seem to hate about Tailwind is that the markup, so the HTML or JSX, will look extremely ugly and sometimes straight out unreadable, because in order to style one element, you sometimes need 10 or 20 classes, which will quickly make your markup look very cluttered. This, however, is not really a huge deal, as you get used to it pretty quickly. Like after a day or two using Tailwind, it's not going to be a huge problem anymore. What could be a small problem is that you will have to learn all the Tailwind classes that they provide, or at least the ones that you need the most. And so that's surely some extra effort there. But luckily for us, these classes are really well named and quite intuitive. And so, again, after a day or two, you will have automatically memorized the most important class names that you use all the time. Another downside of Tailwind is that you need to install and set up Tailwind on each new project, which will always take like 5 or 10 minutes. Now, the biggest issue, at least for me personally, was the feeling that I was kind of giving up on vanilla CSS. So, as I'm recording this, I wrote my first line of CSS almost 20 years ago. So, that's a lot of investment in one technology. I also was always against all kinds of CSS frameworks, for example, like Bootstrap, or even against React component libraries, simply because I wanted to write my own styles. However, with Tailwind, I do actually feel like I'm still writing my own CSS, just in a different way. Tailwind is such a thin layer of abstraction that it doesn't make you feel completely removed from CSS. So, in my opinion, the benefits clearly outweigh the bad parts here, at least enough to give Tailwind an honest try. So, trust me, I was really hard to convince for all the reasons that I just talked about. And so, if even I can like Tailwind a lot, then everyone can. And I'm saying this because for some reason, many people like to hate on Tailwind for no apparent reason, so without even having tried it. So please don't be that kind of person. This is indeed a controversial technology, so just give it a try before forming an opinion about it. And in fact, this section of the course gives you exactly that opportunity. So over the next few lectures, we will style the entire project that we're building right now using 100% Tailwind. And so this is guaranteed to show you if you like Tailwind or if you're never gonna use it again. So let's go find out. So as I mentioned in the previous video, we need to set up Tailwind on each new project that we want to use it on. And so let's now do that for our current project. Now, instead of me just showing you all the steps to set up Tailwind, let's actually follow the official documentation. So let's open up a new browser tab, and then we just Google for Tailwind, and then this will take us to their documentation page. So here we then move to the documentation, and actually immediately we are on the installation page. But if in the meantime this documentation site has changed, then just make sure to come here to the menu and then select installation from there. Alright, now it's also important that you select version 3 right here. So whatever is the latest version of the major version 3, because that's the one that we're going to be using in this course. Okay, so here we have different options for installation. Let's select this one here that says Framework Guides. And then what we want to do is to set up Tailwind with Vite. And again, if in the meantime the website here has changed, then just Google for Tailwind install Vite. And so that will then probably take you to the exact same page. All right, and so now that you have your list of instructions, let's just follow it. So the first step, of course, we already did. So we already have our project. So next up, we need to install Tailwind like this. So let's just copy this and then opening up a new terminal. But here I want you to make sure that you're using Tailwind at version 3, because otherwise something might have changed in the meantime, and then your video or the code that you're writing will not work in the exact same way as what I'm doing in the video. So let's now give it some time here while it installs. So let's head back here and get this next step. So let's do this one, which will then create the Tailwind and the post.css config files. So that's exactly what happened. And so now we have these two new files. So post.css config and Tailwind config. So let's see what we have to do next. And so for this one, let's actually open up our Tailwind config file. And so what we need to do is to now copy this array here to the content. So here, instead of this empty array, what we want is this, to basically tell Tailwind where our index.html file is located and also where all our JavaScript files are located. So by default, they are inside this source folder, but if for some reason we changed all of this right here, then we would also have to change this config. But by default, this is how it works. Now let's see what the error here is. But this is simply ESLint not liking the syntax here. But that's no problem at all. So the rest here is actually the same. And so let's keep going. And so now what we have to do is to actually change our index.css file for the first time. So let's grab all of this here. So copy this and paste it right at the very top of index.css. And in fact, we will now get rid of all of these classes, or at least most of them. Let's just comment this one out. And then again, let's paste this here at the very top. And with this, we are actually finished. So all we need to do now is to start our project. And then we can start using Tailwind in our project. So let's close this. And let's maybe close the process that we had already running just to restart our application. So npm run dev. So let's wait for it. And in fact, we can immediately see that something looks different here. So Tailwind already applied some base styling to our application. So basically it removed all the styling from all the elements. And if you want to know exactly what that CSS reset is, you can come here to the documentation again, and it is right here in this pre-flight. So all the base styles that Tailwind is applying are described right here. But anyway, let's now test this out for the very first time. So just to see if Tailwind is really working. So let's come here to our homepage, and then here, let's style this text a bit. So we just use the class name prop that we have been using all along, with the difference that now we will be using Tailwind's classes instead of our own classes that we previously had in index.css. So let's say text XL, so extra large, and let's say text yellow 500 and font semi bold. Give it a save, and beautiful. So you just wrote your very first line of Tailwind CSS, and the result is exactly what we might have expected. So the text is now extra large, at least in comparison with the rest here. The text is also yellow and semi-bold. Now, of course, we will go over the course of the section into how all of these class names work, but for now, I just want you to type these classes here just to see their effect. Now, okay, so we might think that with this we are done, but actually there are two more things that we need to do. And the first one is to install the Tailwind VS Code extension. So let's just search for Tailwind here, and then it is this first one, so the official one by Tailwind CSS. So let's install this extension, and this one, of course, you will only have to do once for your VS Code. So the nice thing about this is that it will now show you exactly what CSS is being written for you as you use each of these classes. So for example, text XL here corresponds to a font size of 1.25 rem, which is equivalent to 20 pixels. Then here, this text color will give you this, and the semi-bold font will give you a font weight of 600. So that's really, really helpful, but that's not even all, because we also get now auto-completion out of the box. So if we start writing text center, for example, then here we get this auto-completion. So we just need to select that, and then you see that our text got centered. And so with this, maybe you start seeing that these class names are actually really intuitive and easy to use. So in this case, what this class here does is simply to do text align center, which I'm sure you are already familiar with as well. Okay, so this is one of the important things that we needed to do. And now, finally, we also need to install a special prettier extension. So let's search for Tailwind prettier extension. And it should be this GitHub link here that is in Tailwind Labs GitHub repo. So just click here, and so then we need to install also this one right here. So let's copy that, open again a new terminal, and then install this plugin. And so what this will do is to automatically sort the order of the class names in the way that Tailwind recommends it. And this is going to be pretty helpful for you, because then you will always find the same class names in the same position of this long string here. All right, and now this might already work by default out of the box, but just to make sure, let's also create this prettier config file and then copy this code in there. So you see that we are starting to have a lot of these config files, but well, that's just how it works in modern React development, or actually modern web development in general. So prettier.config.js, let's paste that here. And we could even config all kinds of other stuff about prettier here. So in case you're not familiar with this config file, for example, we could also say that we want single quotes instead of double quotes. So let's say single quote and set it to true. And if we then come back here and give it a save, well, then we get some problem. So let's click here on this red prettier, or you could also have come here to the output and then select prettier from there. So let's see what is wrong. So, well, this is a lot of stuff to read. Here it still seems to be correct. But here is the problem. So rename prettier.config.js to end in CGS. Okay, so that was a mistake here, but it's also good to see that this kind of thing happens all the time. And now as I save this, actually you saw that these double quotes that we had here got converted to single quotes. And so with this, we know that it is working. And also down here, now it says formatting completed. Okay, so let's head back to our terminal. And now right here, as I save this, notice how the order of the classes here should change. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. Great. So now we have Tailwind correctly set up, and so we are ready to start using it right in the next video. Let's now start to really dive into Tailwind by learning how to work with colors. And to start, let's go back to Tailwind's excellent documentation. So whenever you're writing some Tailwind, I think it's always a good idea to keep this documentation open at all times, because this documentation is really, really well made and will allow you to find what you're looking for very fast. And so with this, you will be learning the most important Tailwind classes in no time. So let's then come again here to the menu. And of course, if your window is a bit bigger like this, yeah, let's actually leave it like this. Then we don't have to always go to that menu. So let's come here to the customization part, and then let's check out Tailwind's colors. So Tailwind comes with all these different color palettes here predefined. And so what usually we do when we are designing a page is to select like one gray color. So that would be one of these right here. And then we also have some like main or base color for our brand or for the application. And so that's going to be one of these other colors. Now, of course, we can also use our own color palettes simply by adding them to Tailwind's config file. So to this file right here. But for now, we will not do that. And instead, we will just select some colors from here. So our main color will be this yellow here. And so that's why we used text yellow 500 here for this H1. So this color name and this number right here maps exactly to the colors that we have here. So this is the yellow and this is the shade of 500. And as you see, they vary here between 50 and 950. And so if we wanted this H1 here to be a bit darker, then we could use, for example, a 700, and then that got a little bit darker, or of course, we could also go really bright. So something like this. But 500 works best in this situation. So you see that to change the color of text, we use text and then dash the color and then dash the shade. So basically the intensity of the color as we have it right here. Now, if you didn't know yet how to style the color of text, then you could come here. So here also in the sidebar, we basically have all these different properties or all these different classes that we need. So here in typography, we have, for example, the text color, but even easier than scrolling up and down here all the time is this really nice search bar. So you can just click here or at any time hit Control or Command K, and then here you can search, for example, for text color. And so that will then bring you to that page. And so then here indeed, it shows you that we can control the text color using text dash and then the color itself. So with this name of the color and then the intensity. We can also give it some opacity as we can see here, but let's leave that for later. Okay. Now sometimes we also need this color set to inherit, and so then we can use this class, or we need to set it to transparent, then we can use this class. And really here you can check out all the classes that are available. So to set the color of some text. So that's one way where we use color, and another one is background color. So let's try for that. So background color, and there it is. And so here you see that basically we set the background color of some element with bg dash, and then again the name and the intensity of the color that we want. So that's pretty intuitive, I think. So bg just stands for background. And so let's try that out. And let's start with our header element. So let's give it the same yellow here as a background. And so we just type bg yellow 500, and beautiful. So there it is. Now let's also style here this card overview. So let's come here, and the color that I want to select. So let's come back here to the overview of all the colors. Where is that? Right here. So I'm actually going to select this stone gray right here, because it has a bit of this brown touch, which complements the yellow color very nicely. So these ones up here are a bit more bluish, so they are a bit colder, and then these grays here get a bit warmer. And so I'm looking for one of these more warmer grays. All right. So let's add that background color right here. So bg stone, and then let's see what happens if we go for the darkest one, which is 950. So that's almost black, so that's maybe a bit too much. Let's see, 900, and that's still pretty black. And 800, I think, looks just right. So let's leave it like this, but then we have the problem that the text here becomes too dark as well. And so let's immediately change the text color as well. So let's say text, and instead of making it completely white, which we also could by doing this, and now we cannot really see it. Let's maybe make this a bit smaller again. So usually white color doesn't look so good, and instead it's best to use the same color, but with a lighter shade. So let's use a 200, and that looks just right. So with this, the contrast isn't too high. Now here, since I want this link actually to stand out, let's make this paragraph then just a bit darker. So let's say text stone 300, and yeah, nice. So just a very small touch, but since we have all these colors available, why not just use them to create a little bit of visual hierarchy here? All right, and now let's go back here to home, because I want to style this here in a bit of a different way. So right now the entire text is this yellow here, but actually I want it to be gray, and then only this part to be yellow. So to have, again, some nice contrast there. So let's make this one here actually, again with our stone color, and then 700. So this is a color that looks really nice on top of a white background. And then let's just wrap this here into a span. Just like this. And then let's give this one here the text color of yellow 500. More like this. And yeah, there we go. Great. And this is essentially how you work with colors in Tailwind. So you need to know the name of the color, and then whenever some color is necessary, like in a background or for text, you just add the color name and the color shade, and then Tailwind will transform this to our actual CSS. So in this case, this is the color that we get here. And of course, we can also inspect this right here in our DevTools. At least if we had a bit of space. And yeah, so here are exactly the classes that we add. So there's no transformation. It all simply gets applied exactly in the same way that we write the classes in our markup. Next up, let's do some basic text styling. But before we go do that, I actually wanted to show you something else in the previous lecture. But let's now go do that, which is that, of course, we can not only use these Tailwind classes right here in the JSX, but also inside our HTML. So, for example, we can add some classes here to the body that we want every element on the page to inherit, or that we want to set on the entire body element. So typically that is like a background color or a text color that we want the entire page to inherit. So that's pretty standard CSS, which I'm assuming at this point that you know about. So throughout this entire section, I'm assuming that you are familiar at least with the fundamentals of CSS, because otherwise, without knowing CSS, it's going to be very hard to understand Tailwind. But anyway, here we do not use the class name, but just class, which is regular HTML. And so let's give this here a background color of stone 100. And so you see that it turned a little bit darker here, so a bit gray. And then let's also give it the text color of also stone and 700. And so notice how this element and this element now have exactly that color. So they inherited this gray color right here from the body element. And so then we can actually remove that from here, from the H1. Great. So we already learned a little bit about formatting text, actually, or we didn't really learn, but we already used it in the first Tailwind lecture. So we learned that we can basically position text with text-center, or we can also use text-right to center it to the right or to the left, which is not really necessary because that's also the default. Now, the most common thing I would argue that we do with text is to define the text size and the text weight or the font weight. And so let's again come to our documentation. And then here we have all the most important classes regarding typography. And so let's start with the font size. And as always, you can also just search, for example, for text size right here. Or actually it should be font size because that's the name of the CSS property. So here you have all the classes that we can use in order to style the size of text. So text extra small, small, base, then large, extra large, and then all the way to 9XL. So which then gives us this font size of 8 rem. And notice how this not only sets the font size, but also the line height, which immediately makes the design look a bit better. Then let's see what else we have here. But these are really just examples. So usually the most important thing is right here at the top. And so this is how we got this text extra large right here. Now this class name was for me one of the more confusing ones because font size is the name of the CSS property, but then in Tailwind it is called text for some reason. But again, after some time you will just automatically memorize this. Then for the font weight, the property is actually called font and then something. So let's again search for that. And even better, let's do it right here. So font weight, and here we go. So instead of having to mess with these different numbers, now we just have names. So font semi-bold, for example, which is the one that we used for our H1 there. So this one right here is semi-bold. And so I think that here in this component, we are actually finished. So let's come here to the card overview again, and let's do some changes here as well. So first, let's make this text here also semi-bold. And so as we start typing out these classes, we will slowly start memorizing them automatically. And finally, let's also make all of this uppercase. So both the link and the paragraph. and so we can do that here in the parent element. And so to make text uppercase, all we have to do is the uppercase class. Yep, that worked. And so let's move on to the header. And here let's do actually the same thing. So make this here uppercase as well. And here in this link, I now want to also give it some letter spacing. So let's try to see what happens if we start typing letter spacing. Well, nothing really happens. While, for example, the uppercase class name is pretty intuitive. So even without knowing it, maybe we could start writing uppercase and then we would start seeing the autocomplete coming on. Well, actually that's not happening here. Let's try that again after saving. Well, that's not really working for some reason. Well, maybe I need to close my VS Code and restart it, but I'm not going to do that. But anyway, the class name for letter spacing is a bit confusing. So for me, that was one of the hardest ones. And so let's just search for that here. And so here we have the actual name, which is this tracking. And so let's try this widest one. So tracking, widest, and nice. So with this, we got some space here between our letters. Now notice how this tracking that we just used is actually the highest one. So it's the widest one that we can use. But what if we want more? Well, let's come down here. So all of this is not really important, at least not for now, because what we're concerned with here right now is to give this here an arbitrary value. So some other value that is not covered by one of the Tailwind classes. So in this case, we can, instead of defining this keyword here, use the square brackets and then place any value that we want in here. So that can be pixels or ramps or whatever we want. So let's say we wanted 5 pixels. And so you see that then changed to 5 pixels. Or we can say also to rem like this, and then we would get this huge space. Okay, so that's not really so relevant and shouldn't be used all the time, but it's nice to know that this works in Tailwind. And of course, it doesn't only work with the tracking where it's not really that important, but it also works, for example, here with the text size. So for example, here we could also say text should be 100 pixels. Then it would become huge. So even though there is no actual Tailwind class for these 100 pixels. So there's something similar, maybe 96 pixels or something like that, but something truly huge, let's say we wanted 300, then we would really have to use like this escape hatch. So this is basically an escape hatch where we can escape the predefined in more rigid classes of Tailwind. But most of the time we shouldn't do this and just stick to the classes that Tailwind gives us. So 99% of the cases, they are more than enough. And now just to finish, I want to also style this user right here. So let's actually create a new component here in the user feature folder. And then here, let's for now just hard code my name again, but later on, this will actually come from Redux. So here, let's now include that. So username like this. And then let's just style it a little bit. So let's make the text smaller. So with text SM and also make it semi-bold again. So this time we get the auto-completion and that is then really, really helpful. Okay, and with this we have styled here most of the text that is visible right now. Of course, we still have all these other pages to style, but we will leave that for a bit later. One of my favorite things when working in Tailwind is spacing. So using classes for margin and for padding, and also for all the other things in the box model. So things like borders and display. And so let's now explore these a little bit, as these are one of the most important things that we use all the time in Tailwind. Now let's start by actually including this create user form right here into the homepage. So here inside this div after the h1. So create like this. So create user. And for some reason we have to do our manual import here again. So create user. And then features user and create user. All right, so here we have this very basic form, but now we need some spacing around all of this. So we need some spacing between the h1 and the form, and probably also here between the beginning. So between this div right here and the header. So let's use some of Tailwind's classes for that. So right here in the h1, we want to now add some margin to the bottom. And the way we do that is by writing MB. And then here some number. So let's start with 4, and then I will show you what these actually mean in a second. And notice how the automatic class sorting then placed this margin here at the very beginning. So this MB, all it does is to set margin bottom to 1 rem. And so let's now come here to our Tailwind docs and let's search for margin. And so here we have all these different values that we can use. So this one actually takes some time to memorize because there are many different options here. But basically the M always stands for margin, then X means in the X direction, so left and right. The Y direction here is top and bottom, and then we also have margin for the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. So these are the most important ones that we really need to know. And then after that, we have these numbers here. So 0 is of course 0 pixels, then we have 0.5, and then from there we have some scale that Tailwind came up with. So we have 1, which is 4 pixels, then 6 pixels, which is this 1.5, and then so on and so forth. But it is not a linear scale, because for example here 8 is already 32 pixels. So this 8 is not 8 pixels. All right, so we have all of this here. You see it finishes at 96, which is this huge margin. So this huge value. All right, we also have auto here, which is margin auto that we use many times to center elements. And yeah, if you want more information, you can, as always, read the documentation page right here. So what I just explained works this way for margin and also for padding. So we also have like PB and then 4. But anyway, here let's increase this, let's say to 8. So this is then 32 pixels, and this looks a bit better. And over time, you will of course get a feeling about which values you need in which situations. All right. So now here, let's add some margin to the top, and let's say in this entire div. So let's say MT and then 10. So not P, but T. And beautiful. And if we want to center this text here, so the content in the form, we can actually just move this center up here. And yeah, that then centers everything. Now let's do the same here at the bottom as well. And so we could do MB 10 as well. So if we wanted 10, or we could do also, let's say 8. But if we want both of them to be 10, then remember that we can also use this helper. So MY, so in the Y direction. So that gives then 10 pixels to the top and to the bottom. And not 10 pixels, but really just this value of 10, which translates to actually 40 pixels. Okay, next up, let's go to the header and add a little bit of padding inside this header. So here we already have the class name, and so let's just add some padding to the X direction. Let's say 4 here. And so that X direction is the left and the right, and then top and bottom, PY. Okay, nice. And so writing this is actually a lot faster than having to write out all of this here by hand, right? So I really, really like these classes right here. So for margin and for padding. Now let's also add a border right here. So the border is also part of the CSS box model. And so let's also talk about that right here. So the way in which we add a border is in 2 steps. First, we write border and then the direction, which again is B for bottom. But it could also be top, or it could be left, right, or X and Y. But here we just want it at the bottom, and then we can again set a value for the width. So this one, for example, would be 2 pixels, or we could do 8 probably. And I'm actually just making this up. So after some experience, you know that in some places you can add some values and sometimes you cannot. Now here we don't need anything actually, because by default, if we just write border B, that will then be 1 pixel. And then as a second step, we also need to define the color. So that's border, and then we write a color in our usual way. So stone, and then some color. Let's just do something dark here to see. And indeed, there it is. So our classes got reorganized here again. And again, if we wanted a bigger border, we would do it like this. And now let's make it a bit lighter so that we can really only see it very faintly here. So this is just a small detail, just so I could show you how this border works. And then to finish, let's, as always, also style this card overview that is part of our layout. So here we want some padding as well. So let's do just padding and then 4. And so this will then apply it to all 4 sides. Or actually, of course, not. So this was just in the Y direction, but just P4. So just padding 4 will then put it everywhere. So on all 4 sides. All right. And now staying again on the topic of spacing, Tailwind actually includes a very, very nice and helpful class which allows us to add spacing between elements in a very easy way. So without, for example, having to use any flexbox tricks. So the way that works, and let's say we wanted some space between these elements here, is that on the parent, you simply use space, then the direction, so X for horizontal and Y for vertical, and then the amount again. And beautiful. So here we created this nice space that we wanted. And let's see what this actually does. So what CSS is actually written. And so this one is a little bit more complex. And so with this class, we can achieve this really important thing that we need all the time just by writing this simple class. So by now, hopefully you are starting to see all the advantages that Tailwind gives us. So again, for me, the main advantage is that we can write all of this styling here without having to switch between CSS and JSX or between these component files. And also, we don't have to come up with all these class names, which is always a lot of work, which might sound strange, but actually, if you have a large application, then you need to come up with lots of class names, which will then create all sort of problems. And again, here we can check out this amazing class. Just type spacing here, or maybe space, so space between. This is actually the one that we are looking for. And so here you can learn more about this, as always, if you want. And now just to finish, let's also talk about the display property, because that is once again also part of the CSS box model. So basically here, for all of these different display set to anything, the class name is simply the property value. So we have block, flex, inline, and the one that I'm interested in now is the hidden one. So in this case, it's actually different from the value. So display none is equivalent to the hidden class. So what I want to do now here is to hide this user on smaller screens. So let's just come here and let's use the hidden class, and then it's gone. Nice. Now notice how I just talked about smaller screens, which actually brings us to the topic of responsive web design, which is fundamental in Tailwind. And so let's now move on to the next video and start learning about that. The way in which responsive design works in Tailwind is one of the most fundamental things that you need to understand about Tailwind. And so let's now get to that. So by default, Tailwind comes with 5 breakpoints. And these breakpoints are mobile first, which means that they are min-width media queries. So let's again head over to the documentation and check this out. So this is one of the core concepts. And of course, you can read about all these other ones, but here we are focused on responsive design. And so here we have these 5 min-width media queries that I was just talking about. So again, these are mobile first. This means that when we're working with Tailwind, it's usually a good idea to start by implementing the mobile layout. So a mobile first design. So the way that this works in practice is that we can prefix any of Tailwind's class names with one of these breakpoint prefixes. So this one is for the small media query. So for all the viewport width that are larger than 640 pixels. And the same with these other ones. But since this is a bit confusing to just understand like this, let's again use it in practice. So since Tailwind is mobile first, all of these classes here will by default apply for all the screen width. And then if we use one of these prefixes, that will then apply from that viewport width on. So let's say that when the viewport is a bit larger, we actually want more space here and here. And so we can basically redefine this margin here for one of these breakpoints. So let's say that at the small breakpoint, so SM, then colon, we want margin Y to be 16. And so, as we give this a save now, then you see that immediately something changed here. But to really see this, let's open up here the responsive view, and then here we can change the width as we'd like. So notice how here the small breakpoint starts at 640. And so whenever the width is greater than 640, then this margin here will override the default one that we have here. And so that's what I was saying initially. So that these classes here, so the default ones without any prefix, are the mobile first classes. So they apply only if there is no breakpoint overriding them. So here as we approach then that other width, then here we get this extra space. So the margin is then increased because then from there on, this class here is going to be applied and is overriding this one. All right, so it's very important that straight from the very beginning, you start getting into the habit and into the mindset of building your layouts mobile first. And then from there, you can start adding these prefixes here for different media queries. Okay, so now let's start also applying a bit more spacing here in the header and also in the card overview. So here also, from the small viewport on, let's change the padding in the X direction to 6. Give it a save, and there we get that additional space. And as we get below that value, then that is gone. And so then again, the default here is starting to apply. So don't make the mistake that many developers make, which is to think that this small here means that this class is going to apply to small screens. So that's not how it works. How it works instead is that this class starts being applied from this value on. So from the small breakpoint on, which is this 640 pixels. But below that, everything that we have here without the prefix will be applied. All right, let's also come to our card and do the same thing right here. So here we have padding 4 on all sides, but now let's also do something different here on the small breakpoint. So here we will have the px, so padding at x, also set to 6, but as we save this, actually nothing happens. And the reason for that is that we do not have the unprefixed version of this. So instead of p4, let's do px4 and py4, which is effectively the exact same thing. But with this media query here can then overwrite only this part. Well, still nothing happens, but that's because I'm also here at the wrong breakpoint. So now here we have that extra space. And to stay consistent, let's also change this one. So small, then space x4, or actually that should be 6, of course. 4 we already had. And notice how these media queries here, so the breakpoints, will always get pushed to the end of this class string automatically by the Prettier extension or the Prettier plugin that we installed earlier. Now, all right, so we did a few things here on this small breakpoint. Let's now also increase the text here for another breakpoint, so for the next one. So next up, we have the medium one, which starts applying at 768 pixels. So this basically here is to target tablets. Now, if you took any of my HTML and CSS courses, you will know that we should usually not target any devices in our breakpoints, but instead we should set breakpoints at specific points where our design actually breaks. So where there is some problems in our designs. And so if you are using Tailwind in a real world project, you should actually customize these breakpoints. So basically creating your own, which should be explained somewhere down here in this page, or maybe not here, but yeah, right here actually. So you can customize your theme again in the Tailwind config file, where you can then give it your own names. So you could call them tablet, laptop, and desktop instead of just small, large, and medium, and then also specify your own values here. But here we are just going with stock Tailwind, so just with all the default values. So now let's increase the text here as soon as we reach the medium breakpoint. So let's actually first make the text a bit smaller. So by default on all screens. And so for that, let's use text SM, so text small. And so, yeah, with that, the text just got small. But then as we reach the medium breakpoint, so at medium, we want to put it back to text and then base, which is basically just the default text size. And so let's now go to that next breakpoint. And indeed, then our text gets larger. Now next up, let's also style a little bit here this create user. So here we don't have any styles yet. And so let's now change that. So let's format this paragraph here a little bit. And let's start by adding some margin to the bottom. Yeah, just like that. Then let's make the text also small. And this will actually look great on a mobile phone. So I tested all of this out actually on a mobile phone, and it looked great. So that's how I took all of these design decisions here, which of course I cannot go through here. So here we are just learning how Tailwind works, not the exact decision behind all of these styles. But anyway, let's make the text a bit lighter also here, so that this one here stands out more. And then, just like with the other text below, as soon as the screen gets larger, so at the medium breakpoint, we set the text back to the base text. So basically to the normal text size. And so let's see that happening. And there it is. Finally, let's just add a little bit, so just one class here to this input. So class name. And we will have a whole lecture about styling these input fields later. But for now, the only thing that I want to do is to increase the width here. So that is also related to the box model, which we talked about earlier, but let's just do that now. So in order to change the width, we can just write W and then the value for the width. So let's say 72, which is, again, not 72 pixels, but it is some value in the Tailwind scale. So in this case, this just corresponds to 288 pixels. Then we also could set the height, let's say to 10. And so this would then set the height to 40 pixels. That's not what we want here. And so let's just keep it like this. And the rest of the styling we will do later. Great. So we're making great progress here. Next up, one of the most important things we haven't talked about yet is basically building layouts. So Flexbox and CSS Grid. And so let's start talking about Flexbox right in the next video. Now it's time to finally learn how to use Tailwind's utility classes to implement layouts with Flexbox. And let's actually start right here in the card overview. So the simple thing that we want to do now is to place this link here and this part on the left side by side. And then this information should be on the left and this one on the right. So that's something very easy to do with Flexbox, right? So all we have to do is to make this a flex container, then align the items vertically, and then also justify the items. So this is what we do most of the time in Flexbox, and so let's now learn how to do that. So the flex container is of course the parent container of both the link and this paragraph. And so that's this one right here. And so let's keep adding one more class here, or actually multiple classes. And so now we start getting that situation where this class name string is getting really, really long. So that's what some people really don't like. But again, you will get used to this. So in order to declare this as a flex container, we usually do display flex. And so in this case, we just have to do flex, because as we hover over this, we will see that this implements exactly display flex. Then let's say we want to vertically align the items, and for that we would use align items center. So the corresponding Tailwind class for that is items center. And so this looks pretty much the same because the texts have basically the same size, and so we can't really see that. But next up, let's also justify the items. So if we want the space between them to be basically divided between all the different items, we would usually do justify content space between. And so in Tailwind, that is justify and then between. And beautiful. So this pushes this content right to the right side. And indeed, this gives us justify content space between. Nice. And as always, let's also check out Flexbox here, which should be somewhere, right here. So here is all the things about Flexbox, like the flex property itself, which is what we have here. Then Well, now we are back to the beginning, but you can check this out yourself. So I already showed you the most important parts here, and throughout the rest of the project, we will of course learn more and more different things about Flexbox. But arguably, the most important things are really this one here, align item center and justify between. And as you could see here, maybe from the auto completion, of course, we could have used other justifies. Well, now for some reason it's not appearing. But for example, justify end would also work, and then it would push all the elements there to the end, or justify start, or really all the other values that you probably already know about Flexbox. Okay, and now let's do the same thing here in the header as well. So making it a flex container, then align items center is items center. And I think that all of these are actually pretty easy to memorize. So now we get here this auto completion. So for example, we could also use justify around. And so this would look like this. So we would also get a bit of space around here. But let's again do between, which I think is the most common one. And so with this, they're just side by side. And now it's actually time to also bring back the username there. So remember how we hid the username like this. So this is what should happen when the screen is actually pretty small. So in a situation like this, like on a mobile screen, where we don't have the space to display everything. But then at a certain point, for example here at the medium breakpoint, we can show it again. And so let's do that. So let's do medium. And then here we want the display no longer to be hidden, but to be block. So display block, basically. So that's what we get here. And so as we reach that breakpoint, then let's wait for it. And there it is. And so here now we can really see the justify between class making Flexbox work in the way that we are expecting it to work. But anyway, I just wanted to do one more thing here, which is to make this text here a lot larger. So also in this medium breakpoint. So here let's do text 3XL. And so this looks a bit nicer. So if you were to watch this on a tablet now, or maybe even a computer, then this looks a lot better. But it still works great on a smaller screen like this one. Well, maybe except that we should have some space also here, but that's easy enough. So let's come here and add some padding there in the X direction, let's say 4. And again, you will intuitively know which values to use here as you start using Tailwind on your own. And for now, this is all I had to show you about Flexbox. And so next up is CSS Grid, so that we can actually build our layout here a bit better. Next up, let's use CSS Grid in order to build our overall layout, and we will then also improve that layout using some additional Tailwind classes. So basically what we want to do is to set up a grid which contains 3 rows for the layout. So 1 row here for the header, 1 for this content, and 1 for discard overview. And the goal of that is that we can then easily push this overview here all the way to the bottom of the screen. So let's come here to our app layout. And so here let's now remove this class name of layout, which no longer exists in our CSS. And then let's make this the grid container. So similar to Flexbox, in order to make a grid container, we just use the grid class. Now, if we give this a save, nothing really special will happen. And so let's also define some rows and some columns here. So first, just for experimenting, and then once we know how grid works, we will really build our final layout with it. Now, first of all, we should also give this here a height. So let's say height, which is just this h, and then here, as always, we can define some value. So let's say like 40, which would look like this. Well, we can't really see that. So let's give it a background color. So BG red, for example, this one here, and beautiful. So let's make this here a lot bigger. And I don't know how big this actually can get. So for some reason, sometimes we lose the autocomplete here. Maybe 128 works. Well, let's see. So that's why we have the documentation. So height. So let's see all the classes. And so the tallest one is apparently 96. So just for the fun of it, let's actually define our own value like we did earlier. And let's set it to 600 pixels. And so now we start seeing at least something, maybe 400 or 500. And yeah. So we start seeing now that this is actually already a grid, because by default, it is stretching these 3 rows here automatically to the size of the content. And so let's now explicitly define some grid rows here. And we do that simply with the grid row and then the number of rows that we want, class name. And so you see that nothing really changed because they still have the size of their content itself. So just for the fun of it, let's say grid row or grid col 2. And with this, we would create 2 columns, which also for some reason are not appearing. So maybe that's cols. Yeah, just like this. Now we could also define a gap. And so here again, any value would work. And so then we get this gap here between, which we cannot really see because of that background, but it's really also not important. So we could also have it just horizontally or just vertically by writing gaps or gap x for, and so then it's only here between these two, or we could use gap y and then it's only here. Okay, but this is really just for experimentation. So let's get rid of this, but we do actually want to create our own rows. Now the problem with this is that it will create 3 rows of the exact same size. Well, here it should be actually grid rows. So the nice trick of seeing if the class name works or not is to hover it. And if we then get some code here, that means that the class actually exists. And so now indeed, the 3 rows here have the exact same size, which is really not what we want. Instead, what we want is, or can be visible, actually right here, which is to have the rows like this. So the first one should be just the size of the content, the last one as well, and then the one in the middle should fill all the other remaining space. And so let's go ahead and do that. So the way we can do this is to again use square brackets to define our own custom column right here. So again, kind of as an escape hatch from Tailwind. And so here we can say auto, then we need this underscore, then 1fr, and then auto again. And so once again, I'm assuming that you know exactly how CSS grid works. And so this, for example, 1fr unit should make sense to you. And so if we give this a save now, then we get exactly what we were looking for. Now to finish, let's just get rid of this one here. And instead of specifying a special value, we can use hscreen. And so this will then give it basically the entire height of the viewport, which is equivalent to setting the height to 100 viewport height units. So this is one of the special values that we have here. So hscreen, hmin, max. We also have hfull for height 100%, but here we are really looking for this one. If you wanted some percentages, you could then use this one here, for example, for width 50%, you would use this one. And yeah, as always, you can just check out this documentation if you need it. So now we can finally get rid of this. But here I forgot the square bracket. Well, this is not correct because I placed the H screen here inside. Yeah, now that's great. But watch what happens if the page was really small. So then here we would have to scroll, which is really not what we want. So what we need to do is to set the scroll behavior to scroll here on this main element. So again, that's pretty standard CSS, but with Tailwind, all we have to do is to define or to use the class here of overflow scroll. So what this does is exactly what we have here. So it sets the overflow property to scroll, making it so that if there's not enough space to display the content, it will then force us to scroll. All right. Now next up, let's go here to the new order page. So order new. And then here we see that we have all this content here in this left side of the page. So usually what we do most of the time when we design a page or an app is to center somehow the content. So center it in the middle of the viewport. And so let's also learn how to do that. So for that, we first of all need to give the container a certain width. And so let's do that with width and then something here. And then again, I will give it a background color like this. And so we see that this 20 is really not enough. But actually, we don't even want a width, but we want a max width. So in these situations where we want a fluid design, we should always use max width. And so here actually they look a bit different. So here we have max W, and then instead of the normal values, we again get small, extra small, medium, large, and then all these other ones. All right, so let's now use max width, and then let's say 3XL. All right, so let's maybe see this in this view. So with just 50%. And so notice how then at some point we get all this white space there at the right side, where we actually want this, so this red part here, to now be centered in this viewport. So distributing this white space basically equally between the left and the right side. So the way we do that with CSS is to add margin left and margin right auto. So again, hopefully you already know about that trick. And so let's now use that here with Tailwind. So all we have to do is margin on the X side, so left and right, and then set it to auto. And with this, our content is nicely centered. And it clearly doesn't have this width that we defined right here. But the reason for that is that this is now a grid item. So this is just how it works with CSS Grid. So one way around this is that we can wrap this into another div like this, and then we got that fixed. The only thing that we need to do is to then make this element actually with overflow scroll. So let's grab that, and there we go. So now the scroll bar is nicely appearing here on the right side, and everything works nicely. All right, so let's remove this from here, and beautiful. Now we could also add the margin that we have in the home page, so here at the top and at the bottom. So let's do that here maybe. So we could do margin Y and set it to 10 again. And so that would then create some nice spacing. But actually, I want different spacing here at the top of the page for different pages. And therefore, let's define this margin here individually for each page and not here on this wrapper. So here in this layout. So basically all the styles that we're defining right here will apply to all the pages because the pages are rendered here in this outlet and therefore here inside these elements. But of course, we can also set individual styles on the page level simply by adding some styles, well, to the components that make up these different pages. So let's revert it back to what we had. And with this, we finished the lecture on CSS Grid. And as always, make sure to check out the documentation here to learn everything that you need to know. But for now, let's move on to our next topic. Next up, we're going to take a look at element states such as hover, disabled, or focus, and we will also implement CSS transitions. And we will do all this while styling some links and buttons. So here in the cart page, so up here we have this link. And now I want to style this here a little bit, so make it blue like a usual link. And then when we hover it, I want to make it a bit darker. So that's something pretty straightforward. And so let's learn how to handle that hover state in Tailwind. So let's come here to the cart page. And so here we already have that link. And so now we just have to add some more classes. So first, let's make the text smaller. So text small. And then let's also make the text blue. So a blue 500 like this. And now let's implement the hover state. And it's as simple as now writing hover and then here writing another class name, which will then replace the other one. So in case we are hovering, we want text blue 600. And so this is where it becomes really handy to have all these different color variations built right into Tailwind. But anyway, let's now try this. And indeed, notice that there is a subtle color change. So as I hover, it becomes this kind of bluer blue. So here we can see it really nicely with this dark color. Okay. So basically with the hover prefix, we can write or define any classes that we want to appear in the hover state. So for example, we can also use underline. And so, as you can expect, then the link will also get underlined. And here, of course, the color is 600. And yeah, so this is how we define hover, or how we handle the hover state. So this was just a very simple example. And so next up, let's style a more complex button. So let's come here again to order/new. And now we want to style this order now button right here. So let's close this and then in create order, this is where our button is. Yeah, right here. And let's start here with some basic stuff. So let's give it the same background color as the rest of the app. So yellow 400. And actually, I think that here I used 500, but I'm looking for 400 actually. So 500 is a bit too dark. Yeah, that looks nicer. And so let's keep going. So let's make the text also uppercase. Let's make the font semi-bold. Let's make the text also darker since we are now on this yellow background. And so remember that our gray is stone. And then let's use the 800 variation. And finally, let's add some paddings here. So vertically, let's use 3 and horizontally, let's use 4. And in order for this to actually take effect, we need to make this button an inline block. So that's display inline block. And the corresponding Tailwind class is just inline block like this. All right, so this is already looking pretty nice. Let's just add maybe some letter spacing there. And we can really place this anywhere we want because the prettier extension will then take care of ordering this. So tracking, let's choose this one. And then finally, let's also give it some rounded corners. So that's a new class that we haven't talked about yet, but it's very simple. So we just specify rounded here, and then we can use these different values that we have here. For example, rounded large, which will give us, I think, these 8 pixels. Yeah, but actually what we want is rounded full. So this pill shape button here that many applications use. And so this basically gives us a really, really large border radius like this. Okay, and so with this basic styling in place, let's now add some element states, starting again with hover. So when we hover, this time we want to make the background a bit lighter. So let's go 100 down, make it yellow 100, or not 100, 300 actually. And so let's see. And indeed that works. However, there is no transition here, so no animation, which usually we also have in most web applications. And so let's now add that transition here in Tailwind. And the way that we do this is to do transition and then the properties that we actually want to be transitioned. So many times when we write normal CSS, we just do all. So we can do this, but let's be a bit more specific because we already know that only the color should be animated. And so we can then specify transition colors like this. So this is already going to work. Nice. But if we want to specify also the duration, we can do so with duration and then dash whatever milliseconds that we want. So let's say 300 milliseconds and beautiful. But now notice what happens when I click on this button. Well, for now here we get, of course, these problems. Well, first of all, let's actually deactivate all of this here. So I don't want anything to happen. So when I click on that button, I don't want to create a new order because now all I want to do is to style this. So now here we get the wrong phone number. So let's fix this. And well, this is not what I wanted. So let's go back. And what I wanted to show you in the first place was actually the focus state here. So let's just do it this way. So hitting the tab key to reach this button. So here we have this really ugly looking blue outline. And so we don't want that. And so let's get rid of it. And here, let's just quickly and temporarily fix that error that we had earlier, which was that we wasn't returning anything here. So let's at least return null. So we will just remove that a bit later. So in order to remove that ugly focus there, we can do focus. So the focus state, and then here outline none. However, we cannot just leave it like this because this will create some accessibility issues. And so we need to do something else. So in this focus state, instead of having this outline, we can use something that Tailwind created, which is what they call a ring. So a ring, as we can see here, is basically some shadows that they will place outside the element. So this creates this ring, and then we also need to define the color of the ring. So again, that's within the focus state. So all of this should only happen when the element is focused. And so we need to prefix all of this always with this focus word. So let's make it the same color as the button already has. So that's yellow 300, at least in the focused state. Because actually when we focus the button, we also want the entire background color to change to that yellow. So yellow 300. And so now watch what happens when we focus. Now we still cannot really see it because we forgot the offset. So focus, ring, offset, and let's set it to 2. Ah, nice. So this is looking a lot better than before, right? So that ugly blue outline is gone. And so now if we use the tab key to reach this element, then this is what the focused state looks like. So this looks quite nice. And so we achieved this by using this Tailwind concept of rings. And again, you can learn all about that here in the documentation. So again, when the button is focused, we give it this yellow background color, which is the same one as the hover one. So this one here. And then we remove the outline and give it this ring. And here we could also specify some values to make it a larger ring. And then here we give the ring a color and an offset. So a space between the ring and the element itself. Okay. Next up, we could also use the active state, so which is basically the state whenever the button is being clicked. So this one we are not interested in here, but I just want to show you something. So just let's say we give it another color, and so as I click, it will get that new color. Okay. But now finally what we actually want to do is to also style the disabled state. So in the disabled state, we want to change the cursor. So we can use a cursor class. So cursor, and then let's use the not allowed. And again, just make sure to check out the documentation to find out which cursors can be used. So here let's just temporarily set this to true so we can see. And so now as we hover, we can no longer click it, and we get this visual confirmation of that. So this new cursor right there. And of course, we could do all other kinds of stuff. So for example, again, changing the background color to something like this. But let's remove this because I think like this is already more than enough. All right. So this is by far the biggest element that we wrote yet, so the biggest class name string, but don't worry, if we later want to reuse this button, we will be just able to create a new component and then use that component and reuse it all over the application. But let's leave that for a bit later, and next up talk about styling form elements, so like these input fields right here. So next up, let's style some form input elements using Tailwind. And let's start with this one right here. So with search order. All right, so let's add our class name right here and let's get immediately started. So first of all, we want it to be completely rounded. So like with this pill shape. So exactly what we have right there. Then let's add some padding to it. So px, let's say 4, and py 2. And so to make it a bit smaller, let's make the text smaller. So text sm for small, and there we go. Let's also give it a very faint yellow background so that it blends in a little bit better with that background color. And next up, let's actually also style the placeholder. So in CSS, we can easily style the placeholder pseudo element. And so in Tailwind, we can do the same simply by prefixing placeholder. So basically, we want the placeholder to have a text color of stone 400. So making it a little bit darker. Now, I'm not sure if that actually worked. Let's try something else. And indeed, it does work. Also, let's actually make it a little bit wider. So setting the width, so that's just W, and then 28. And so, well, that's actually pretty small. But the reason for that is that, remember, this is actually the style for the responsive layout. And so here we need this to be really tiny because otherwise it might not fit besides the logo there. And then right in the next media query, so at the next breakpoint, we can make it a bit bigger. So in the small breakpoint, let's immediately increase the width to 64. Yeah, so that's a lot better. Next up, let's then also make it a little bit bigger as soon as we focus the element. So let's make it then 72 wide. And so as we click, it gets a little bit bigger. However, it does kind of jump from one state to the other. And so that means that we need a transition here. And let's this time actually use transition all, and let's set the duration again to 300 milliseconds. And that's a lot better. And now next up, let's take care of that focus ring. So let's first get rid of that. So focus, outline none, and then focus. Let's use the ring. Let's give it a color. So let's make it yellow 500 this time actually, so that it stands out from the background. So let's try this out. And this is looking quite nice. Let's give this maybe some opacity here so that we can try to play around with another class here. So ring, opacity 50. So to make it a little bit more subtle. So a nice but subtle effect. So I think this looks really nice. Now there's just one small problem, which is if this is really tiny, then if we now click here, then it becomes really big and messes up the entire layout. So we need to fix that. So basically we only want this part here to happen at the small breakpoint. So only after that breakpoint, this should happen. And that's no problem at all, because we can actually prefix all of this also with the small breakpoint. So this looks now even more confusing, because now we have the small, then the focus, and then the class. But that's just perfectly valid in Tailwind. So now if we click here, then nothing happens. But then as soon as we are here in this bigger breakpoint, so at this bigger viewport width, then that starts working again. Great. So we successfully styled this form input element. And so now let's go ahead to this form again and style these other ones. So where is that? Yeah, right here. So let's do it here in the address for now. And let's again first give it the completely round corners. And let's make it more visible again. And now we want to create some contrast here between the field and the background. So we want this to become a bit more visible. So let's add a border. And this one is simply 1 pixel. So if we don't write any number here, then by default, it's just 1 pixel. And then let's give it some color. So border stone 200, let's say. And then also, as always, some space. So some padding here vertically and some padding horizontally. Or actually the other way around. Nice. And now we could go ahead and copy some of the styles that we just wrote earlier. But instead, let's just keep going here and just write the code. So again, making it a bit smaller here. Giving it a transition. So transition all. Setting the duration to 300. And also style the placeholder. So let's say text zone 400. And actually there isn't even any placeholder here. So I'm not sure why I did that, but I guess it can not hurt also. The next let's get rid of that focus, so outline none, and instead let's bring back our focus ring. And then also giving it the color of yellow 400. All right. And this looks already a lot better. So this one compared to this one. Now, what I also want to do is to actually give it the full width of the form. So let's do width full, which is exactly the width of 100%. And so then it fills up the entire form. So at this point, it doesn't look so nice, but we will take care of styling the page and the form itself later. What matters is that, of course, once the page becomes bigger, then all of this stays nicely in the center. All right. And also, as we go bigger, let's increase the field also a little bit more. So from the medium breakpoint on, let's have the padding X set to 6 and then in the Y direction to 3. And here I forgot the prefix, which was caught actually by the Prettier extension. So the Prettier plugin that we installed earlier. So that's really, really helpful because it just caught a small bug for me here. And that's actually it. So I could now go ahead and copy this entire thing right here into this input. So also this one and this one. But actually, I will show you a way of reusing these classes here in the next lecture. And so for now, let's just leave it like this and not style these ones yet. So the only one that I want to style now to finish is this checkbox right there. So let's go there, add a class name, and the way we do this is to define a height and a width. So let's say height of 6, which let's see what that is. So 24 pixels looks great. Then it should have the same width. And then here we can use the accent class. So the accent, which allows us to also specify a color, which will then style the input like this. So basically what this does is to set the accent color, which is a pretty modern CSS property, which, well, then makes our style box or our checkbox look like that. And then let's grab these focus styles from here, with the only difference that since the focus ring now has the same color, it needs some space here. So when there is a focus, then make the ring offset to 2. Beautiful. And of course, again, all these styling issues that still remain here, we will take care of them once we actually style this entire page. But here we were just worried about actually styling these form elements. In this video, we're gonna learn how we can reuse some styles using Tailwind's apply directive. So basically, using apply, we can create an old school class by composing many Tailwind classes together. So let me show you what I mean by that. So let's come here to our index.css file. And so here we have all this stuff that we actually no longer need, but this loader we will actually need. So we will keep this one here. So here, again, we already have these base components and utilities, which is not really important what they do. But now let's create a new so-called layer, which is called components. So in Tailwind, we can create a few of these different so-called layers. And if you want to learn more about that, then as always, you can check out the documentation, because in practical terms, that's not really important. What matters is that in here, we can now create some new classes. And so let's now create the input class. So just like this. And now what I want to do is to copy all of this. So all of these different Tailwind classes, I will cut them. And then here we can write apply, paste all of that here, give it a save. And now this input class is basically composed of all these Tailwind classes. And so I can now replace this here simply with input. So when I give it a save, then it still looks exactly the same as before. And so let's do the same here. So class name of input and also right here. So input and beautiful. So we have the same styling here now in all these 3 input fields. So again, simply by composing all these Tailwind classes together into this one new input class. So this looks really nice and helpful, right? But that doesn't mean that we should start using this technique all over the place now. Because basically, if we started to doing this for all our elements, then we would simply go back to writing CSS in the old school way. So being back to writing classes and then applying those classes. So that's what we did before. And so then there would be no point in using Tailwind in the first place. So this should really be treated as an exception here when there are so many classes that we are using all at the same time, like this here, and when we do not want to create a new component. Because the actual better solution would be to reuse all of this by creating a React component. So for example, creating an input component, which we could then reuse here in all these different places, which is actually what we're going to do in the next video for our buttons. So again, keep in mind that this way of creating new classes by composing many other classes together with apply should really be the exception and not the rule, because with this we are throwing out of the window all of the advantages that Tailwind actually gives us. Well, maybe not all of them, but surely many of the advantages. But of course, I still wanted you to know about this technique because it is still an important technique that you might see used in Tailwind in some situations. But now in the next lecture, we will actually reuse some other styles. So in particular, this button here. So all of this here, we will try to reuse this using React components, which is indeed the better way of reusing styles. So, as I just mentioned, let's now learn about the better way of reusing styles in Tailwind, which is by using or by actually creating new React components. So, what we want to reuse now is all of this style right here. So the style for this button. And so what we're going to do is to just create a new React component. So let's grab all of this right here. And then here in the generic components folder, let's create button.jsx. Then using again our snippet. And here, as always, we need to then take in the children. So all the elements that will be passed into this button element. And then here we simply return a button with this class. All right. Now to make this really reusable, we also need to accept the disabled prop and then also place that on the button. So let's do that. Disabled, and then here, let's say disabled equal disabled. Okay, and that should actually be it. So here we should be able to just replace this button with the one that we just created, but of course without this class name here. And here that's button, and there we go. It looks exactly the same. And so we can now, back on our home page, reuse the same button here, because once we start typing something here, then this button will appear where we can then click and it will take us to the main page. So let's close maybe this one here. And so that is at create user. So here we have this button. And so we can just replace that now with that button that we just created. Beautiful. Now this is not perfect yet, so this needs a bit more styling. And here we can now actually reuse that input class that we already have. So in the previous lecture, remember we created this input, and so we can now add that right here. And so we now get exactly the same style that we had before. And in this case, the advantage is that now onto this class, so onto all the styles that we already have here, we can now keep adding on more. So here, besides all of these, we now also added this width, and we can even add a margin to the bottom of 8, for example. So to create this distance right there. And so this is another good use case of actually using the apply directive that we used in the previous lecture. So whenever you are in a situation where you actually need to add a lot more other classes in some situations. So that's the case right here. And so here again, we were able to use all the styles here from the input class, but then add these two on top, right? So again, back to the button here, we just were able to reuse all these styles here just by creating this new button component, which now encapsulates all these styles. And so whenever you are using Tailwind in some framework that has components, this is what you should do. I just noticed that maybe here some styling is a bit off. So actually, let's add a little bit more padding once the page is a bit bigger. So maybe here in the medium media query, let's do padding here 6 and padding Y to 4. Or actually right after the small media query. Otherwise, we cannot really see it. Okay, nice. And now let's also reuse this link that we have right here. So we have this link in the cart. So we can close this one and also this one for now, and this one as well. So let's open up the cart where we have this link here. And then also in the error, we have a similar looking link, even though here it is actually a button. So if I tried this, then here we have something that looks very similar. And so we also want to reuse that style. And so let's create another button. So this one will be a bit more complex. So let's call it a link button. Just like this. And again, it needs to receive the children and also the to prop. So similar to the one that we passed in here. All right. So let's just grab all of this, because what we want to return from this link button is usually this link. So let's do this. And then of course we need to import that link right here. And then here we need the children. And then to close that link. All right. And here we now want to dynamically set the to. So to this to. Okay. And so let's now use that here in the cart instead of this. So link button. And with this, we can get rid of that. Let's just reload. And that works just the same. Beautiful. But now what about this error here? So we want to use the exact same thing right here. But here we have a button. Well, let's do some trick here. Let's still use the link button that we just created with this text right here. But then as the toProp, let's pass in just -1 as a string. And then inside this link button component, we can check whether this is the toProp that we received. And if so, what we want to return is this button. All right, so we abstract again all that logic right here. So we can just say if 2 is equal -1, then return this button right here. And of course, not with this text, but again with children. And then of course we need that navigate. So let's grab this, remove it from here, and place that here, and of course importing it. And now here we can get rid of this. And now we should be good to go. So let's just go to the home page here, then go to some page that doesn't exist. Well, we actually should have that button. And well, we actually do. The only thing that we didn't do was to give it these same classes. So actually, let's create a new variable here, just so we can reuse this. So set class name to class name, just so we don't repeat ourselves here. So class name should be class name. Okay, let's reload, try that again, and beautiful. Now we get our blue button here that when we click, we simply go back. And actually, since we are already doing this, we should do something very similar with the first button that we built as well. Because right here in the cart, we actually have a link to order pizzas, which we want to look exactly like all our other buttons. So like these buttons right here. So again, this button that we have here should look just like all these other buttons. So we want to reuse those styles for this link here as well, because indeed, this is right now just a link which takes us to this new order page. All right. So how can we do that? Well, it's going to be something very similar to what we just did earlier. So let's use our button here, and then let's actually copy all of this. So placing that here, and then here, of course, we need to close that button. And then in the button, we need to accept this toProp, because right now, as we click here, nothing is going to happen, of course. So let's go to this button and then also accept the toProp. And then basically, if there is a toProp, then all we want to do is to actually return a link and not a button. So exactly this link right here, and again with the children. And then again, let's create that class name variable like this. Grab all of that. And use the same thing right here. And so now as we click here, well, actually nothing happens, but that's because we did not pass the toProp here. All right, so all of what we're doing here, most of this is just normal React development, right? This has not a lot to do with Tailwind. We are just using a mechanism or creating a mechanism to reuse these class names right here. So basically, we are creating a button that can act both as a link and as a button. But anyway, as we click here now, then it moves to that page. but it also acts as a regular button in this situation right here. Beautiful. So for now, this works fine like this. And later on, we will then create some variations here as well. For example, here for this other secondary button, or maybe for some smaller button. But for now, this is really nice. And so this is one of the ways in which we can reuse some Tailwind styles using regular React components. In this lecture, it's time to move into a bit more advanced or maybe a bit more obscure topics such as absolute positioning, z-index, and a few more. So this is going to be a lot of fun, actually. So let's get started. And the idea here is to now finally format our loader here. So let's come here to the menu, actually, and notice how right now that loader is showing up there at the top of the page. So let's come to our app layout, and in order to format the loader, let's actually always display it. So let's comment this one out, and here let's just say true. And so with this, the loader will basically always be there. So what we want with this loader is that it basically will cover the entire page here, sitting kind of in the middle here, so on top of everything else, and also adding a small background blur. So the way we can achieve this with CSS is to basically add one parent element around this loader here, and then absolutely position that element here in this top left corner and making it so that it occupies the entire page. So let's do that here in our loader. And as I was just saying, let's then wrap this entire element here into another div. Okay. So for now, of course, nothing happens. And so let's start by adding some class names here. So first of all, we want to position this absolutely. So using absolute positioning. And so we can do that just using the absolute class. And just like this, now the loader appears at least already on top of the rest of the page. Next up, let's give it a background color. So this time actually not using stone, but slate, because this is going to look just a bit better. So let's use 200 here for now. And what we also want is for this to stretch the entire viewport. So the way in which we can achieve that is to set both the top, the bottom, the left, and the right position to 0. And thankfully for us, in Tailwind, there is a nice utility class for that. And so that is called inSet0. And so what this does is basically what I just explained. However, now we can of course no longer see the background here. And so now it's time to give this some opacity, which we can do by adding a slash here and then a value between 0 and 100, basically. So for example, 50% opacity would be this, but let's just go with 20 here. So something very subtle, because now to make this look even nicer, let's add a really nice background blur. So this we can achieve with backdrop blur, and then we can choose one of these options here. So for example, let's choose the small one, which will give us this blur of 4 pixels. Give it a save, and this looks really nice and really real world as well. Now all we have to do is to center this here in the middle, which is a piece of cake using Flexbox. So let's just flex and then align the items to the center, which is just items center, and then justify center as well. So just like this, and there we go. And finally, the last thing that we need to fix here is the color of these bars, because let's come here to the index.css, where you see that this loader was actually defined using just this class. So first off, let's move all of this here into the components layer. So it works exactly the same way as before, but with this, it's a bit cleaner. So it's a bit more the Tailwind way. But notice how this is just using this random color here. So it's not random, but it's just some unrelated color that is not related to the rest of the application. However, luckily for us, Tailwind gives us a nice way of accessing Tailwind's colors right here. So instead of hard coding this value here, we can write theme, so without that hash, so just theme, and then colors.stone.800. Give it a save, and then if you check this out, then this is exactly the stone color with the value of 800 that we saw earlier here in our Tailwind documentation. And so with this, we just used all these kind of weird properties here, or these weird class names, to create this really nice, beautiful effect. And actually, I had to look some of these up here also in the documentation. So without the documentation, I would be completely lost. And so that's why I keep telling you that whenever you need something, you can just come here and look it up. All right, and now let's remove this here and put it back to what we had earlier. And so if we now come here, then we see this loading indicator, and then finally, once the data arrives, our menu page here will be rendered. One of the big advantages of Tailwind is its extreme flexibility, which allows us to configure basically everything about it. Now, while we are not going to go deep into configuration in this crash course, let's at least try to explore it a little bit by changing the default font family and by doing some other changes. Now, you can read all about changing the configuration right here, as always, in the Tailwind docs. So basically what we will need now is this tailwind.config file where we can really change everything about Tailwind. Now let's try to get rid of this ugly ESLint warning by using the command ESLint disable. So that didn't work. Or maybe it's ESLint disable next line. Now, there we go. So this looks a lot better. But anyway, here we can see that we can really change everything that we want here. And the easiest way I found to see what exactly we can change is to open up this link here, which takes us to the default configuration. And so then here we can see all the things that Tailwind basically sets by default. So it's all these different values here. And so this is all the stuff that we can overwrite. And so what we will overwrite now is the default font family. And let's get that font from Google Fonts. So Google Fonts, and let's immediately search the one that we want, which is Roboto monospaced. So let's open it up right here, and let's select a couple of styles. So let's say 300. Let's remove that here. So 400, 500, and 600, maybe even 700. And then we can grab this link from here. So just copy this and then place it right into the HTML file. And for some reason you were not able to get this link, just feel free to copy this from the final files of this section. All right. But anyway, now here inside the theme, we can create the font family field. So font family. And then here we can define any name that we want. So for example, let's say we wanted to call this one pizza, and here the font stack would be Roboto Mono that we just included. And I should write it correctly at least. And then as a fallback, let's just use a mono space like this. Okay, and if we come back here, then let's search for the same thing here. So this is in an alphabetical way. And indeed, here we have that font family field. And so here we are now basically overriding that font family. So now we will end up with a new font, which is going to be called pizza. So let's say we wanted to use this in the header. So let's open that. And so in order to select a font, we just write font. And then we see that we get this font called pizza. So if we hover over this, we get exactly what we specified earlier. And so if we give this a save, then there it is. Great. This is, however, not that helpful, at least not if we want to use this everywhere. And so instead, what we can do is to override the Sans font that Tailwind automatically injects into our HTML. So therefore, if we change this here, then this will automatically update for the entire page. So if I save this now, then we immediately notice that the entire page gets this new Roboto Mono font. Beautiful. So this looks a lot nicer than before. And indeed, you see here that the first font is this Sans. And so now we did overwrite this. Now we still have the serif, so we could also use that one. So here font pizza no longer exists, but we can use serif if we wanted. Or at least I thought so. So maybe by doing this right here, we overwrote everything. So I'm actually just trying things out here as we go and making things up. So I never actually tried to use this font serif anywhere. So let's just ignore this because this was just an experiment anyway. But here are some more things that we could try if we wanted. So for example, we could also create some other color here. So let's say colors, and then let's again call it pizza. And then let's make it some weird color like this. Here we get an error. And then we have another error because now all of these color classes that we used earlier do actually no longer exist, because now the only colors that we have are these ones over here. So if we wanted to keep the colors that we already have, but add this one, then we would have to place this into the extent. So basically keeping everything from Tailwind, but simply extending it. And so now we should get this other color here as well. So maybe let's, instead of this yellow, let's use our pizza color. And so indeed, it becomes blue. So that's our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which somehow has been converted here. But still, it is exactly that blue color that we saw earlier. So by doing this, we extended Tailwind's color palette with this new color here. However, this is not really what we're interested in, but we are interested in something else. So let's again come back here so that I can show you. So again, here we could now basically extend all of this that we wanted. So we could do, for example, font sizes and then create like something called huge. And then here we could give it, for example, copy this and make it 80 rem. And then in the header, we could again use that. So text and then huge. And then we would have our 80 rem or whatever we chose there text. Right? So really the possibilities are absolutely endless, as you can see. So I keep doing some things here, but what I actually wanted to change is now this height. So right here, remember how in the layout we used the height of screen, which corresponds to 100 viewport height units. However, this creates problems on mobile browsers. And so instead of using this unit, we should use an even more modern unit, which is called dvh. So let's do that. And I will just, for the sake of fun, keep this one here. But now let's update the height. And so in the height, what we want to change is screen. So screen should now no longer be 100 VH, but 100 dVH, which stands for dynamic viewport height units. And so with this, we no longer have the problem that on mobile browsers, sometimes the viewport height is not really 100%. All right, and so if we come here now and hover over this, you see that now we have our 100 dVH. So exactly what we just specified there earlier. So this all looks pretty magical, and it is indeed really amazing. So all the things that we can change here really opens up a lot of possibilities. But this was actually all that I wanted to show you here in this lecture. So configuring some stuff here where what we do here, so just in the theme object, basically overwrites everything in that category, while here, if we just extend, then we keep the original things of Tailwind, but add our own ones. So for example, if we placed this one out here, then all the font sizes that we were using no longer exist. So for example here, text small, then no longer exist because we just overrode it. Okay, and now we learned most of the stuff that we actually wanted to learn in this section. And so now over the next few lectures, all we have to do is to basically style the remaining part of the application. So for example, this card or this menu here. So let's actually start with this menu in the next lecture. So let's now finally style the menu page. So this is the menu page, and as we see, it loops over the menu data that it receives, and for each of them, one menu item component is rendered. And so let's actually start by styling this menu item right here. And the first thing that we're going to do is to get rid of these huge images. So let's give them a height of 24, which is a lot better. So that's just 96 pixels. Now let's implement the layout here. So basically placing this text here on the right side of the image. And so let's come to this li item and make this a flex container. Then we need some spacing here. So let's give it a gap of 4. And that's a lot better. Now next, what I want to do is to create some lines here between all of these items. Now what we can do is to add a margin to the bottom to each of these gap items, right? However, there is a very handy class in Tailwind, which is the divide class. So we can use the divide class on the parent element of these list items. So right here in this list itself, and that will then place some lines between all the child elements. So that's really, really useful, and it's a bit similar to the space class. So this class that we used here in the card overview, where is that? Yeah, here. So where we can use this space in order to basically create some space between the child elements. And so with divide, we can create a line between child elements. So in order to do that, we just use divide and then the direction. So in this case, the Y direction. And then just like a regular border, we also need to specify the color. So that's going to be stone 200. All right, that looks a lot nicer. And since we are already here, let's also add a little bit of padding between the side of the page and this list. So basically some padding in the X direction like this. Great. So this is already starting to look a bit more real. And so here I think we have enough styles. So let's go back and now also add some spacing here between these items. So this time we cannot do this. So we cannot do like space Y2 because then, well, it keeps reloading here. But I think that's because it keeps reloading the menu data. But anyway, the problem here is that now the line is not in the middle of these two. And so that's why we cannot do this. And instead, we have to work with padding on the menu items themselves. So let's add some padding here like this. And then let's turn our attention here to this part of the menu item. So here we have this title, then the ingredients of the pizza, and then this price. So what I want to do now is to push this price all the way down here. And for that, we can make this a flex container. And you will see what I mean in a minute. So making it a flex container, but this will only make it so that the items are side by side. But instead, we want them to be one after another. So basically, we need to change the flex direction to column. So changing the main axis of the flex container. And we can do that with flex col. All right. And so now it looks basically exactly the same way as before. But since these are now flex items, so this, and this, what we can do is to specify the margin top of auto, which will then push this down all the way. So margin top and then auto, and there we go. And since we are already here, let's immediately format also these paragraphs. So let's just make the text small, so smaller than the rest. And notice how here we have two different situations. We have either the price or this sold out part. So sometimes some pizzas don't exist and then they are marked here as sold out. That's why we have this conditional rendering right here. So we also need to style that one. So also making it small. Let's also make it uppercase here, in this case, uppercase. Then let's increase the font weight a little bit. Let's say to medium. And finally, let's make it stand out a little bit less by making it lighter. So by changing the text color to 500. Nice. So that's looking great. But in order to really show the user very easily that this pizza is sold out, let's also make this image here grayed out a little bit. So let's make it grayscale and reduce the opacity. And so with this, I can show you a few more Tailwind classes. So right here in the image, now we need some conditional styling basically. So let's create a template literal here inside this JavaScript mode. And then let's say if sold out, then we want to add some classes here. And if not, then no new classes at all. So first of all, let's reduce the opacity. So we can use the opacity class and then some value here. So between 0 and 100. And also let's make it grayscale. So that opacity worked, but here probably it's gray with an A, and beautiful. So now it's very easy to see that this pizza doesn't exist. Next up, let's play a bit with the visual hierarchy here of this text. So to make the title stand out a bit more, So let's say here we want the font to be of a medium weight, just like this. And then here, let's make it a little bit smaller. So text small, let's make it italic as well. And let's also make it lighter, just like the sold out text. And also one thing that I want to do is to change here the capitalization of the words, or actually of the text. Because notice how right now this first string here is lowercase. So we can easily change this with the capitalize class, which will basically just do text transform capitalize. Nice. So actually it's not just the first word of the string, but really all of the words will simply get capitalized, which looks a lot nicer than before. Great. So we are almost finished. Let's just add now a button here to add this menu item to the cart. So that's something really important that we don't have here yet. And so let's add that right here in the div that we have down here. So remember that we have this paragraph, we have this other paragraph with ingredients, and then we have this div, which right now only contains this price or this sold out. And so now in the same line here, we want to have the button here at the very end. So let's just add that here. And for this, we can use, again, our button class. Now later on here, we will then have to pass in some handler function, because we will need to add some handler function here in order to actually add the menu item to the cart. But let's leave that for later. All right. Now here we have a couple of problems. First of all, this button is really huge, so we should change that. And we also want this to be side by side with this part here. And so let's also make this one a flex container as well. And then let's vertically align the items. So that's not align, but items center, and then justify between. However, now here we see a problem. So let's try to inspect this. So we can get a bit more space. And so notice how actually this flex container ends right here. So here, as soon as the content is finished, then the div also finishes. So this element. And the same thing up here in this one and in this one. And therefore, all these buttons here are not in the same position. So what we need to do is to allow these flex items to grow as much as they can. And for that, with regular CSS, we set the flex property on a flex item to 1. So hopefully, again, you know about all of these flexbox fundamentals, but if not, that's also not a big problem here. So what I was saying is that here in this div, we should now do flex grow. And so what this will do is exactly what I was just saying. So it is a bit different here, but it's essentially the same thing. So it sets flex grow to 1. And so as I save this, well, nothing happens. And actually it's because I am here in the wrong div. This is not the one that I want, but actually this one, of course. So all of this is this div right here. And the property that I want is actually not even flex grow, but just grow. And so this one is actually exactly the same thing as before. So grow or flex grow are apparently the same, but yeah, what matters is that it works now. Now let's just see what happens when we make this, for example, really small. Yeah, it works great. So it works great here in responsive design. And so let's go back. And now, as I was saying a few minutes ago, is that we now want to change the size of this button. So what we're going to do is to now allow this button to receive a prop about its size, or maybe about the type of the button. And then according to that type, we set a different style. So here, let's already pass in the type prop. Let's call this one small, which of course for now won't do anything. But now let's go to the other places where we used this button and then give it the type of primary. So I believe that was here in create user, right? So type of primary. So this here is really the primary button. And then in create order is the other place. So again, type primary. And so with this, we can now just accept that prop in the button and then handle the styles accordingly. So type, and now the technique that I'm going to use is to create an object here with the styles, and then based on the type, we will get the style from the object. So let's call this styles. And let's start just with the base style. So let's just copy all of this for now, and then we will delete what we don't want to be in the base style. So the base style is basically what will be common to all the buttons, and then some things we change. So what we want to change is probably the text size, which is not even here. Then also these paddings. So essentially the size of the button, and then that's it. So the rest here can stay the same for all the buttons. And so let's now create the styles for the primary, which will be this space here plus some new styles. So actually, there's not even a point of having these styles here in this object. So let's actually, so I changed my mind because I'm just building this as I go. So let's make it an outside variable here. And then here we can easily say the base styles plus some other styles. So the ones that we removed here from the primary were these two, and then these two right here. Okay, and with this, we no longer need this. And then of course here, React is going to complain. And now all we do here is to use styles and then get the type from the styles object. So styles at type. And so this type will be received dynamically. So here from this prop, right? So in all those places where the type is set to primary, then here we will get styles primary, which will then receive exactly these styles right here. So this makes it so that right now the button is no longer working. And so let's also make the small style. So that's again the base. And now all we will have to do is to basically change these other styles. So making everything a little bit smaller. So this one, let's actually leave it the same, but let's just make it smaller in the Y direction. So making it a bit less tall. Then here in the media queries, I think this button should actually only start to become bigger at the medium breakpoint. So let's grab this here, and then let's just change this. So here let's give it 5, and here for the first time we can also use 2.5. And beautiful. So we already start to have something here, but it's not really perfect. So actually we still need to give it here the px class, so padding x, because we did of course remove it completely from here, but we still don't have the padding on the x. But I guess that's because right now we don't have a space between this class and this class. So let's add that there, and there we go. Nice. So here we have this a bit smaller button, and actually let's make the text also small. So text, actually let's make it really small. So extra small like this. And yeah, this looks a bit more natural. But now if we go to the card, where I think we also use this button, then well, it should appear there, but actually I think we didn't change the type in this one. So let's give it the type of primary and nice. So there we get actually the big button and the same thing here as well. So here again, the primary button here as well. But then if we go to the menu, we get the small variation. And so with this, we made our button component here even more versatile. And now just one very minor small correction that I'm going to make is that here we have now a lot more space than here in the beginning. So this doesn't look really centered. And so let's just add a tiny amount of padding to the top here. So for example, just 0.5. So which is like 2 pixels. Yeah. But yeah, it's a bit better. And so with this, I think we finished this menu. It looks really nice and really beautiful. And we did design it right here in the markup. We didn't have to come up with any class names. We didn't have to use, for example, the BAM methodology. And we didn't have to jump between this file and our CSS file, which really are huge advantages. Next in line for styling is the card. So let's go there and let's jump right in. So let's actually start by adding now some space here. So between the beginning of the page and the content. And so let's do that right here. So some horizontal padding here of 3. And also let's add some on the sides. Yeah, that looks nice. And here we don't need a lot of space at the top because I want this link here actually to be pretty close to the top. Then where we will have a bit more space is between that and the H1. So let's add then some space here. So a margin to the top of 7, let's say. And then let's also increase the text here a lot. So to extra large. And let's make it semi-bold. All right. Now here, of course, later we will then replace this with the real name. But for now, let's just leave it. And then let's actually display, so kind of render this fake card also here on this page. So we already have these card item components here. Let's just include or import this module here. And so, as always, we will render one of those card items for each object in that array. So let's do that right here inside an unordered list. So card.map. And the card has multiple items. And for each of them, we will render one card item. And we will pass in the item as an item, and then the key will be item.key. So pretty standard stuff. Let's just close this right here, and there we go. So here we have these card items, and let's immediately add again a divider between them. So divide Y. Let's also give it again the same color. So stone 200 and nice. The only problem is that these dividers are basically only between the elements. But here we also want one at the end, basically to close that list. And so let's add a border to the bottom, and it will automatically use the color of this divider right here. Because basically what this does is to set the border color. All right, then let's also add some spacing here to the top. So margin top, let's say 3. Okay, and then let's also add some margin there. So class name margin top of 6 and nice. And since we are here, let's also add some margin, so some space between those buttons. And for that, we can again use that trick of space. So the space helper class, so vertical space, let's say 2. So that's very little, but when we will style this button, we will see that this is enough. So let's leave that button for the end. And now let's style each of these cart items. And let's start by adding some space between them. So by giving each of them some padding, like this. So here we can have a bit more padding than in the menu, because we have usually not so many items in the cart. Now later on, we will also have some buttons here for deleting the item from the cart and to change the quantity. And actually, let me add one of those buttons here temporarily right now. So let's use our button with the type of small, and then let's say delete. And of course, these should be side by side. So as always, we use our friend flexbox, then justify between and items center as well. Now let's change this one here a little bit as well. So here we want the text to be a bit smaller. So text small, and let's make it then bold, just like this. And now here just some space vertically. So let's say margin bottom 1 to give it a bit more breathing room because of this button. And so like this, it will look great, at least on smaller screens. So on something like this, this is going to look really great. So keep in mind that we will also have like some buttons here to change the quantity. And so if all of this was side by side, then there wouldn't really be enough space. However, at a certain point, there is so much space that it actually starts looking a little bit strange. So at some point, we should probably have all of this side by side here, because like this, the content looks a bit lost. So let's actually start doing that here at this small viewport. So we can, of course, use Flexbox also at different breakpoints. So just like this. And there we go. And now we just need to do our regular things, which is items center and also justify between. And all of these only at a small breakpoint. Now, due to the nature of Flexbox, now this content here doesn't stretch over one entire line. And so therefore, this justify between here no longer takes effect. But that's not a problem, because here at this point, we actually don't even want that behavior. So here we only want some space between them. And so here at this breakpoint, let's just add a gap, for example, of 6. All right. And we will then adapt this a little bit as soon as we add these other buttons here to update the quantity. Now we also don't need this margin here anymore at this point. And so we can remove that also at this breakpoint by saying margin bottom 0. And so that's basically what these zeros here are for. So sometimes we need to set or reset something to 0, and that's when these classes with the 0 come into place. So you saw a small change here, and now everything is nicely aligned again. So with this, I think we finished this cart item for now. And so let's turn our attention to this other button here. So here we want like a really de-emphasized button, which might even be transparent and just with a light gray border. So basically what we're going to do is to create yet another variation in our button. So let's make this the type of secondary and then clear cart. All right. Now, of course, that type doesn't exist yet. So let's create it. So right here. And this button is actually going to be really different. And so here I will not even update the base styles. I will just copy all of this and then change what we want to change. For example, the background should actually be transparent. So really no background. And this one is actually not even necessary because by default the button is already transparent. But we want to have some border as well with the width of 2, and let's give it the color of stone 300. And if we save this, then you see that actually it is already taking effect. All right. Now let's just also copy these paddings because they should be similar. Place them right here. We just need to decrease them a little bit. So let's basically do some hack here where we just slightly decrease the padding to take into account the border. So that looks a bit more natural. And then here at the media query, let's set it to 3.5. Then here let's just decrease the color there. And then finally all the other hover styles and also the focus style. So this one we also want to be very different. So here let's have stone 800, let's say. And for the focus, the same. So background stone. And actually I think 800 is going to be way too much. So that's more like black. So what we actually want is 300 here. Just like this. But let's then, of course, make the text also a little bit darker. So hover, text stone, and here let's use that 800. And then finally, let's change the focus ring as well to stone 200. All right. Let's change the focus as well. And so what we have to do here to finish is also having this one for the focus. Place that right here, because here, of course, the Prettier plugin is no longer sorting these classes. So that only works when we have the classes right here in the class name, but not here. Okay. So that looks great. And I believe that with this, we finished yet another page. And so let's move on straight to the next one, which is going to be our order form. We're almost finishing this long section. And so next up, let's now quickly style the order form. And as always, let's start by getting some spacing here around the page. Basically, just like this. And then let's start styling all these elements here one by one. So here, let's again make the text extra large and make it also semi-bold, just like this. And let's give it a margin to the bottom, this time of 8. So whatever that means. So that's 32 pixels. So a bit more here below than on top. Great. So next up, let's then basically format each of these different boxes here. So we'll just first style this one, and then I will just copy paste this style here to the other ones. So let's add first some margin to the bottom, and then we need some spacing between the label and the input field itself. So basically on small screens, we will have these two stacked, while on a bigger screen, when there is enough space, we will want to have the input side by side with this label here. And so let's just use Flexbox here right away, and then we will change the orientation according to the breakpoint. So let's again make these flex items, just like this, and let's immediately give them a gap of 2 like this. And keep in mind that we need to start by styling the mobile layout first. So this small layout right here. And so here what we want is for the flex items to be arranged in a column. So here we need flex column to change the flex orientation to something like this. And then as soon as we reach the small breakpoint, we will set it then to flex row, which is basically the default. And then at that situation, let's also then vertically center the items. So at items center like this. So here we are actually already at the medium breakpoint apparently. So let's make this a bit smaller. So that here by default, we are basically always in the mobile layout. Then as soon as we have a bit more space, we then have them side by side. Now the problem here is that this label then gets a bit compressed. And so let's change the flex spaces here. So basically instead of using a width for flex items, we should use the flex property. So at this breakpoint, let's set the flex basis to 40. So this then gives it enough space. So yeah, as I was saying, this sets the flex spaces, in this case, then to 10 rem. And so now it works nicely on all screens. All right, and so let's now just go ahead and copy this. So that's absolutely no problem. So there is no need to always create a new component as soon as we need to reuse some of these styles, at least if they are on the same page. So in my opinion, and according to the Tailwind documentation as well, whenever we are in this situation, we shouldn't immediately create a new abstraction. And instead, if we had to change something here, we can just use our editor's tools. So if we had to update this, we would just select all of them and then change them all at once. So that's really no big deal. Let's also grab this one right here for the label. Like this. And nice. Now the reason why these here look different, well, not here, but here they actually do look different. And the reason for that is that the input field is here inside this div, and the same down here, because here in some situations we want to also display this error, so the paragraph here with the error inside, and therefore we have this div here. And actually the div should be here, so the paragraph should really be inside that div. And so what we need to just do here is to add the grow class, so which will give it flex grow 1, and the same thing here. Now for some reason here we also have some differences. Let's make this a bit bigger so that you can actually see something here. And so let's inspect what is going on here. So here we have indeed the flex basis of 40, which gives us, as we see there, the width of 160 pixels, which is exactly what is supposed to happen. So that's what we see here. However, for some reason, here apparently that is not working. And so let's also add the grow class here to this other flex item. Okay, so here in this situation, the other flex item is this div. So we added the class name of grow there. But here, the second flex item is this one. And so besides this input class that we created ourselves, let's try to add the grow class as well. And well, that doesn't fix anything. So let's maybe see what is happening here with this input field. So inspecting that class right there. So let's see what we have. Immediately here I see that the width probably shouldn't be here. So let's see what happens if we take that off. And now it works. So when we are using these elements as flex items, we should never use the width property. So that right there was our bug. So let's come to our index.css file, and from here we need to remove this full width. Okay, and so now we need to put it back on these two right there. So where is that? So right here, with full and not flex grow, because since this is inside this div, this is now no longer a flex item. All right, nice. So this was probably all a little bit confusing, but it would be easier if we were just writing the markup and the styles at the exact same time. So here we already had the markup, and now we are adding the classes later on. But if we were doing everything at the same time, this would be a bit more straightforward. But anyway, now let's talk about finally this checkbox here. And so here we will also want to add some margin to the bottom. Let's say a lot of margin to actually give it some space there. Just like this. And then let's use Flexbox to put these side by side and add some space. So a gap of 5 and then items center. And to finish, let's just make this one here a bit more prominent with font medium, just like this. Beautiful. Now all we will have to do is to style that error message that might appear down there. So right now, nothing here is working. So no new orders are going to be created. But now I'm just inputting here some fake data so that we can see the error there. So here is that error message. And so let's now format this. Because of course, this doesn't look the way that it should. So where is that error message? Right here. So let's start by making the text smaller. So extra small, maybe. So that's already a huge improvement. Let's add some margin to the top. So margin top, let's say 2. And then let's place this here in a nice box so that it really looks like an error. So first let's make the text red. And again, it's so handy that we have all these colors here, one class away, basically. And then let's use also red, but a very faint one, like this. And then we just need to add some padding to all sides and make it completely rounded. So just like this, and really nice. Now maybe don't make it completely rounded, but just a little bit, maybe like this. This looks a bit more natural. Now we could add some trickery here to also make this label here still in line with the text box, but let's just leave it like this. So this is good enough, I think. And the same thing is true also here in the mobile view. The only thing that I think we should change, and do so for the entire application, is the text size of this button. So this is actually way too big, and I've been noticing that for some time, but now let's fix that actually. So here the base style should have the text set to small. So that always looks a bit better in these buttons. So let's place the same thing also in the secondary buttons. And there we go. So this one has the small text, and then the small button has the extra small text. All right. And so for example, in the card, that then also looks a bit more natural. All right. So with this, we finished actually this order form. There's just one tiny thing that I have been wanting to fix for a long time, which is the title of the page. So let's change that here also to Fast React Pizza Co. And then finally, let's get rid of this fav icon and we will use an emoji instead. So there is a very nice trick that we can use to do that. And so let me Google, and you should Google as well, emoji as a fav icon, which should then bring you to a CSS trick website. So my internet seems to be a bit slow, but yeah, so the one that we want is this one. So at CSS tricks, emoji as a fav icon. And then all we have to do is to copy this code snippet right here and then replace that fav icon that we have right now, which is this one. And then here we can replace that with a slice of pizza. All right, let's wait for it. And beautiful. So this looks really cool, I think, and adds this nice touch to our application. Okay, but anyway, with this we are almost finished. The only thing that we have left to do is to style the order overview page. So let's open that up, actually. So let's search for this order right away. And so then I can show you what I actually mean. So this is the page that we need to style next. And so let's quickly move on to the last lecture of this section. In the last lecture of this section, let's now style the order overview page. So this will require a lot of styling so that we can practice Tailwind a lot more. And so let's quickly get started. So we are already here on the order overview page and in the order component. And so let's start as always by adding some padding here to the page like this, which again, remember, we didn't use right in the layout because these values are a bit different for all of the pages. Especially the menu page doesn't have this padding right here. So we need to set this individually. Now here on this page, we have first this part, which contains the number of the order. So that should be here. We will place that here in a minute. And then it has basically the status of that order and if it's a priority order. So then we also have the estimated delivery time. And then here finally, we have the prices. And later on, we will also add then a list of all the pizzas that are part of the order. So let's add some equal spacing between all of these. And so when we have an equal spacing, we don't have to mess with margins, but can instead use that space helper class. So space vertically 8. And there we go. So here we already have now some breathing space. And now what I want to do here is to actually display the order number. So order number, and then here let's add the ID and then the status. And then let's also style this similar to all the other page heading that we have on other pages. So we could again make a component for that, but it also works just like this. And so now here we have the same ID that we have here in the URL. And so now let's place these here side by side there on the other side. So as always, flexbox for that. Let's center the items and justify between. So it's a bit annoying that it always basically loads the data here again. But yeah, we cannot really prevent that. I just want to show you what happens if the screen is really small. So then we get this, which we don't really like. And so let's use another flexbox trick that we haven't used yet, which is to basically allow the flex items to wrap onto a new line. So that we do with flex wrap, which translates exactly to flex wrap set to wrap. And so let's wait for it. Yeah, this looks a lot better like this. All right, now let's style these two right here, which are inside this div. And let's start by giving them some space between them. So space x2. And I guess I shouldn't save so many times because then it also takes some time to load that data again. But anyway, here let's now make like a pill-shaped thing, basically, which will make this here red, telling us that this is an important priority. So background red 500, then rounded full for that pill shape that I was just talking about. Then let's add some padding here. Let's make the text really small and uppercase and also semi-bold. Let's give it a save here just to see what we have. Ah, that's already looking nice. Let's just make the text also a lot lighter. So text red 50 instead of white. And let's also add some tracking here again, which is always a good idea whenever we have some uppercase text. All right, so that looks great. And now let's do something very similar here for preparing the order. And all we will do is to change the text from red to green. So green right here and right here as well. And with this, I think we have finished this first part, which is looking pretty nice. And so let's move on here to this second part. And so here let's do basically something very similar. So just grab this, paste that here. And so that's already a bit nicer. And again, whenever there's not enough space, it will just move to the next line, basically. Now here we should probably add some gap, and the same thing also here. So right before moving to the next row, we will have those elements really touching there. So let's add that gap here in both these situations. So gap of 2. And here as well. Okay. And then let's also give this here some other background color. So to stand out from the rest of the content a little bit. And then we also need some padding. Let's say 5 here. And then horizontally, I like to always give it a little bit more. Okay. And so this is what it would look like on a bigger screen. Well, not like this. So this is the small screen again. So this is the bigger one. And now let's just style this text there a little bit. So font medium for this one. And then let's de-emphasize this text by making it smaller. So extra small. And then text stone 500. And by the way, if you want to learn about all these design principles that I'm sometimes mentioning here, you can check out my HTML and CSS course. So even if you already know HTML and CSS, that course has a huge section on design principles that will help you design interfaces just like these ones. Because you can know all the CSS that you want and also know Tailwind, but without these design principles, you will not be able to create nice looking and well working interfaces like the ones we are designing here. But anyway, let's just move on here. And here we will simply basically list these prices. So here we won't have any flexbox. We will just add a little bit of space between them. And also again, give this a different background color and the same padding as we had in the previous element. Okay, so this looks a bit strange right now, but that's because we will add the list of pizzas here in the middle very soon. So first let's finish this part right here. And so let's de-emphasize this first two prices here and then really emphasize this total price. So the pizza price plus the priority price. So class name, making it small, still giving it the medium font here, medium, and then let's also again change the text color. Then I will do the same thing with the other one. So the priority price. And then finally, let's just make this one here bold. All right. And now finally, let's then make the list of all the pizzas that are part of this order. And so they are stored in this card property of the order that we receive from the API. Because remember that this here is already real data, right? So this is already coming from the API. And so let's now use these real pizzas in this order and render them right here. So right after these prices. So let's create an unordered list. And then as always, there we map over this list or over this array, where then each item should be rendered as one order item. So we already have that component there, actually. So our colleague basically already built that for us, so we can now use it. But for some reason, we do have to import it manually. So import order item from order item. All right. Now here, of course, we get an error message because we didn't pass in the data that we need. So that's item equal item, and the key is, as always, item.id. So this should fix it. And indeed, here we get our pizzas. But this looks pretty bad as it is. And so let's, as always, format this. Starting just like in the card with a divider here. Then using that same divider color. So nicely like this. But now let's again add a border to the bottom. And this time also to the top. Bottom and top. And with this, we are ready to go right into the order item itself and then do some simple styling here as well. So first of all, as always, let's add some vertical space. Nicely like this. And here our component will not refetch the data all the time because this here is just a presentational component which doesn't fetch any data. And so now here, let's just put these two things side by side. So items center and justify between. So pretty standard stuff. Let's just add some gap here as well and make the text small because this information is not really that important. All right. And now to finish, let's just make the values here basically bold. So here just the number. So class name, font bold here, and also the price itself. And with this, we finished the styling for now. Later on, we will add some more stuff to this page, but for now, we are good to go. And this looks absolutely beautiful, if you ask me. Let's just make this window here again a bit bigger so that we are not anymore in that small mobile view. But in any case, we just finished this Tailwind section. So I hope that you really enjoyed learning about Tailwind and that with this, you were able to take a decision if basically you want to keep using it in the future or if maybe you really don't like it, which of course is also more than okay. But in this project, we will of course keep using it as we keep adding more components to really implement all the features that we are still missing in the application. So we cannot really add any pizzas to the menu yet, for example. And so all of that is what we will start working on right away in the next section. And so hopefully I see you there very soon.